Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to unpack another book?
I'm ready when you are.
Great. Today, we're diving into A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Now, a lot of people might know him from The Power of Now.
Yeah, that one was a huge hit.
It was. So in A New Earth, he's building on those ideas, really exploring how we can live more fulfilling lives. But the key, he says, is getting past this thing called the ego.
The ego.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because when I first heard about the ego, I kind of pictured like someone being super arrogant.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Like, look at me, I'm so great.
Right. But Tolle's definition is a little bit different, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot more subtle than that. He's not just talking about being a braggart. He's describing the ego as this kind of false sense of self that we create. It's built on all these thoughts we have, the emotions we feel, and even how much validation we get from other people.
So it's almost like this image we're trying to project to the world.
Yeah, and it's constantly comparing itself to others, leading to that feeling of separation.
So like, am I good enough? Do people like me?
Exactly. It's those doubts and insecurities that can really trip us up.
Okay, so if that's how Tolle defines the ego, how does that actually cause suffering? It seems kind of abstract.
It does seem abstract, but let me give you an example. Think about a time you received some criticism at work.
Oh, I've had plenty of those.
Right, we all have. Now imagine instead of taking that feedback as an opportunity to grow, your ego jumps in.
Like Tolle does.
Right, suddenly you're feeling defensive or maybe inadequate, even resentful. You miss the chance to learn because the ego is busy protecting its fragile little image.
That's so true. It's like my ego throws a tantrum and then I'm just spiraling into self-doubt. So, okay, how do we escape this ego trap? How do we actually start living in a way that's more aligned with our true selves?
Well, that's where Tolle's emphasis on awareness comes in. He's really big on recognizing that you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're the awareness that's observing them. It's like, imagine you're watching clouds drift by.
Okay, I can picture that.
You notice them, but you don't get swept away by them. You're not trying to control them, you're just observing them.
So it's about creating some distance between us and our thoughts, not necessarily suppressing them or pretending they don't exist.
Exactly. And that's where mindfulness comes into play. It's all about cultivating that ability to observe your inner world without getting carried away by it.
This really reminds me of what he says about living in the present moment.
Absolutely. I mean, the ego loves to keep us stuck in the past, replaying old regrets or worrying about the future.
Yeah. That's me all the time. It's like, I can't ever just be present.
And Tolle's saying that true fulfillment, that real sense of aliveness, can only be found in the now. Like, think about being at a family gathering, but you're totally preoccupied with work deadlines.
Oh my gosh, that's me at every family gathering.
We miss out on those genuine connections because we're not really there. We're not present.
It's such a good point. It's like we end up living life on autopilot, just going through the motions without actually appreciating the beauty of each moment.
Exactly. And that's such a shame because, as Tolle says, the present moment is all we really have. It's all there is.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Like maybe we all need to put down our phones more often, quiet the mental chatter, and actually just savor what's right in front of us. But it's not always easy, is it? Tolle also talks about this concept of the pain body. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the pain body. It's basically this accumulation of emotional pain that we all carry around from past experiences. It's like a shadow self that can kind of hijack our reactions, especially when we're stressed or under pressure.
So it's not just about what's happening right now. It's all this baggage from the past that can color our perceptions and lead to impulsive reactions.
Exactly. And the tricky thing is that the pain body can become so familiar, so ingrained in who we think we are, that we don't even realize it's there. We just think, well, this is just how I am.
But recognizing it is crucial, right? If we can identify when that pain body is triggered, maybe we can choose a different response.
You got it. It's about creating space for a more conscious response, choosing wisdom over that knee-jerk reaction that comes from the pain body.
It sounds like this is where Tolle's teachings start to get really practical.
They really do.
Because it's not just about understanding these concepts, it's about actually applying them to our lives. And speaking of practical applications, another big theme in A New Earth is this idea of letting go of attachments. Tolle says that clinging to things outside ourselves, whether it's people, possessions, or specific outcomes, is a major source of suffering.
Yeah, and I think this is where Tolle's ideas might rub some people the wrong way.
I can see that. Like, is he saying we shouldn't care about anything or anyone?
No, not at all. It's not about becoming indifferent or detached. It's more about shifting our perspective. He's saying true freedom comes from releasing that grip on things we can't control.
Okay, so it's more about recognizing what's within our control and what's not.
Right. The more we attach ourselves to external circumstances, the more we're setting ourselves up for disappointment when those things inevitably change.
That makes sense.
Think about it like this. Imagine you lose your job. It's natural to feel a sense of panic. You might feel lost, even worthless. But Tolle might ask, what if this isn't a disaster, but an opportunity for growth?
So it's about looking for the potential in every situation, even the ones that seem negative on the surface.
Exactly. Instead of clinging to the past and resisting change, what if we could embrace it as a chance to redefine ourselves and explore new possibilities?
It's like releasing the anchor that's been holding us back, letting go of that need to control everything.
Exactly. And in that flow, in that surrender, we might just find a deeper sense of peace and even joy, even amidst all the ups and downs of life.
It's a powerful message. And I think it really ties back to the power of the present moment. When we let go of attachments and embrace the now, we free ourselves from that ego's grip and tap into a more authentic way of being.
You got it. That's the heart of Tolle's message.
So how do we actually do that? Where do we even begin to put these ideas into practice?
Well, mindfulness is a great place to start. Tolle talks about taking just a few moments each day to focus on your breath.
Yeah, just noticing the sensations of breathing.
Right. Or you can try mindful walking, really paying attention to each step, to the feeling of your feet on the ground. It's about bringing that present moment awareness to whatever you're doing.
So we're not trying to empty our minds or anything like that. It's more about becoming aware of those thoughts as they arise.
Yes. And as we practice mindfulness, we start to see those habitual thought patterns.
The negative stories the ego likes to tell us.
Exactly. And then we can question those thoughts.
Yeah.
Challenge their validity. Ask ourselves, is this thought really true? Is it helpful? Is it creating peace or suffering?
That's so powerful because often those thoughts are just running on autopilot in the background, and we don't even realize how much they're influencing our mood and our behavior.
That's right. But from that place of awareness, we can choose to focus on thoughts that are more empowering, more aligned with who we truly want to be.
I love that. But let's be honest, sometimes those negative thoughts can feel pretty overwhelming. Are there any other practical tools we can use to cultivate a more positive mindset?
Well, Tolle's a big fan of gratitude. It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we already have.
It's so easy to get caught in that trap of, I'll be happy when.
No. I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I lose those 10 pounds, when I finally meet the right person. But gratitude's about finding contentment and appreciation right here, right now, regardless of our circumstances.
So it's about choosing to focus on the positive, no matter how small those things might seem.
Yes. And one simple way to practice gratitude is to keep a gratitude journal. Just take a few moments each day to reflect on the things you're grateful for, the people in your life, the experiences you've had, even something as simple as a warm cup of coffee or a sunny day.
It's like training our minds to see the good, even when things are tough. It's a beautiful practice. And, this reminds me of something else Tolle talks about, the ripple effect of our actions.
Oh yeah, he's big on the idea that what we do impacts the world around us.
He's saying that even small acts of kindness can make a difference.
Exactly. So whether it's volunteering for a cause you care about, helping a neighbor out, or just offering a kind word to a stranger, it all matters.
Because in the end, we're all connected.
We are. And when we act from a place of generosity and compassion, we tap into something bigger than ourselves, something that gives our lives meaning and purpose.
Reading A New Earth and having this conversation has been so eye-opening for me. Tolle's insights have really challenged me to look at my own thought patterns, especially the ways the ego sneaks in and creates suffering.
It's a book that definitely makes you think.
It does. And for me, one of the biggest areas of growth has been around this whole seeking validation from others thing.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's like I realized how much energy I was wasting trying to impress people, trying to present this perfect image to the world.
It's exhausting.
It is. And it's like through mindfulness, I've been able to detach from that need for constant validation and start feeling more comfortable just being myself.
That's huge.
It is. And honestly, that's what makes A New Earth so powerful. It's not just about intellectual understanding. It's about putting these ideas into practice and actually experiencing that transformation firsthand.
It's about living it, not just reading about it.
Exactly. Embracing a new way of being in the world, one that's grounded in presence, awareness, and a deeper connection to ourselves and everything around us. And if you're feeling inspired to keep exploring these ideas, we actually have a podcast called Book Talks Wisdom where we do just that.
We delve into the core messages of all sorts of books, sharing key takeaways, personal reflections, just like we've done today.
And if you subscribe to Book Talks Wisdom, you'll get notifications for our latest episodes, so you won't miss out on any of the thought-provoking discussions.
Plus, we love hearing from our listeners.
We do. If there's a particular book you'd like us to deep dive into, just leave a comment and let us know.
It helps us create an awesome library of book decodes that cater to all your interests.
So whether you're looking for personal growth, spiritual insights, or just a fresh perspective on life, Book Talks Wisdom is the place to be.
Now, to wrap up our deep dive into a new earth for today.
Oh, yes. What stood out to you the most?
You know, that whole idea of the ego as the separate entity, like it's constantly trying to run the show, that really got me thinking.
It's a sneaky one.
It is. It makes me wonder if we can become more aware of it, what kind of freedom and peace might open up in our lives.
That's a great question to ponder. What about you? What resonated with you the most?
Honestly, it's Tully's perspective on relationships. I love how he talks about them as mirrors, reflecting back our own patterns and unresolved issues.
That's so true. We often project our own stuff onto the people around us.
Exactly. So instead of blaming others for our unhappiness, what if we looked within and asked ourselves, how might I be contributing to this dynamic? What can I learn from this situation?
That's a powerful shift in perspective. And it's a great reminder that personal growth is an ongoing journey.
It is. And one that can be incredibly rewarding.
So if you're ready to keep exploring these ideas and discover even more practical tools for creating a more fulfilling and meaningful life, join us for part 2 of our deep dive into a new earth right here on Book Talks Wisdom. We'll be back soon with even more insights and reflections on this transformative book.
Can't wait to continue this journey with you.
See you soon.
You know, it's funny because when you think about transcending the ego, you might picture like this blissful state where nothing bothers you anymore.
Right, like you're just floating above all the messy stuff of life.
Exactly. But that's not really what Tolle's getting at, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's more about how we relate to those challenges, how we respond to the inevitable ups and downs of life.
It's about recognizing that a lot of our suffering actually comes from resistance.
Resistance to what is.
Yeah. The ego wants to control everything. It wants to keep us in this little comfort zone, safe from anything that might disrupt its limited view of reality.
But life doesn't really work that way, does it?
Nope. Life's messy and unpredictable. And when things don't go according to plan, when we encounter those inevitable curveballs, that's when the suffering kicks in.
It's like we're clinging to this fixed idea of how things should be. And when reality doesn't match up, we struggle.
It's that resistance, that clinging, that creates the suffering. And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier about accepting the present moment without judgment.
Oh, absolutely. Because when we judge a situation as bad or unfair, we're basically attaching ourselves to a story about how things should have been different.
Right. And that story creates resistance. It keeps us stuck in the past, replaying all the what ifs and should haves.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions or pretending everything's fine. It's more about acknowledging those feelings without letting them completely take over.
It's like saying, okay, I see you, sadness. I feel you, anger. But I'm not going to let you run the show.
This reminds me of a time when I was going through a really tough breakup.
Oh, breakups are the worst.
They are. And I was just heartbroken. I felt so lost and alone. But then I started trying some of those mindfulness techniques Tolle talks about, like focusing on my breath, observing my thoughts without judgment.
And did it help?
It was amazing. It didn't magically erase the pain, but it created this space between me and the emotion. I could observe the sadness without being totally consumed by it.
You were able to create some distance.
Yeah, and it gave me a sense of perspective. It allowed me to move through the healing process with a little more grace and resilience.
It's a beautiful example of how Tolle's teachings can be applied to those really difficult, messy parts of life. It's not about achieving some emotionless state. It's about developing a healthier relationship with our emotions.
It's about recognizing that we have a choice. We can get lost in the drama of the ego, or we can choose to respond from a place of presence and awareness.
Love that.
Which brings me back to something you said earlier about how Tolle redefines the ego. It's not just about arrogance or self-importance, it's also about these different forms of egoic identification. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Tolle talks about how the ego can attach itself to all sorts of things. Our possessions, our accomplishments, our job titles, our roles in our families. even our beliefs.
So it's like we're building our identity on all this external stuff.
And that can be really shaky ground, because what happens when those things are threatened or taken away?
The ego freaks out.
Totally. It feels threatened, and we experience suffering. Like, imagine someone who's really attached to their job title. They get so much of their validation from that role.
Yeah, their whole sense of self is wrapped up in it.
Exactly. And then what happens if they lose that job?
They feel completely lost, worthless even.
It's a huge blow to the ego. And it makes me think about social media. It's like this breeding ground for egoic identification, isn't it?
Oh, totally. It's all about comparison, judgment, and constantly seeking external validation.
They can really amplify those tendencies for sure.
So it's about being really mindful of how we're using those platforms, making sure we're not letting them dictate our sense of worth.
Yeah. Remember, you're not your follower count. You're not the number of likes you get. Your value comes from within.
Love that. So back to mindfulness for a sec. Any tips for cultivating mindfulness in our daily lives, especially in this digital age where we're constantly bombarded with distractions?
Well, one of the simplest but most effective practices is to just bring awareness to your breath.
Just notice the inhales and exhales.
Yeah. Throughout the day, just take a few moments to pause and feel your breath. It's a really simple but powerful way to anchor yourself in the present moment.
It's like hitting the reset button on your mind.
It is.
And speaking of resetting, another practice Tolle talks about is cultivating stillness.
Oh, stillness. So important.
It seems counterintuitive in our culture of busyness.
Yeah.
But do you think it's really essential?
Absolutely. In those moments of stillness, we disconnect from the external noise and reconnect with our inner wisdom.
It's like we're creating space for that deeper part of ourselves to emerge.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some grand gesture. It could be as simple as starting your day with 5 minutes of meditation.
Or taking a walk in nature without your phone.
Yes. Even just a few minutes of conscious stillness can make a world of difference.
That sounds doable. And I think it's important to remember that this whole journey of transcending the ego, it's a process, not a destination.
Totally. There's no magic switch. We don't just suddenly become enlightened beings.
It's a lifelong journey. And there will be times when we fall back into old patterns.
Oh, absolutely. The ego's sneaky like that.
It is. But the key is to just keep practicing, to keep bringing awareness to our thoughts and actions, and to keep moving towards a more conscious and fulfilling way of being.
It's about progress, not perfection.
And that's a really encouraging message. We don't have to get it right all the time. We just have to keep showing up and keep trying.
Keep learning, keep growing.
Exactly. And this reminds me of something else Tolle emphasizes, the importance of forgiveness.
Oh, forgiveness is huge.
He's saying that holding on to resentment and anger ultimately only hurts us.
It really does. Forgiveness is such a powerful act of liberation. When we forgive others, and maybe even more importantly, when we forgive ourselves.
We release the grip of the past.
Yes, and we create space for healing and transformation.
It's about recognizing that everyone's on their own journey, that we all make mistakes.
And that holding on to grudges keeps us trapped in a cycle of suffering.
Forgiveness allows us to move forward with more lightness and compassion.
So much lighter. And it's important to note that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning harmful actions or letting people walk all over us.
Right, it's not about being a doormat.
No, it's about choosing to release that negative energy that's weighing us down and preventing us from fully living in the present moment.
It's an act of self-love.
It is, and it ties in beautifully with one of the most profound aspects of a new earth.
That idea that there's a deeper essence within us.
Yes, a true self that is already whole and complete.
Tolle calls it our essential being, right? That part of us that's connected to something greater than ourselves, something beyond the limitations of the ego.
And it's in those moments when we quiet the mind, when we connect with the present moment, when we let go of attachments and embrace forgiveness, that we get a glimpse of that essential being.
We experience a sense of peace, joy, and connection that's beyond anything the ego can offer.
It's beautiful.
And that's ultimately what a new earth is all about, isn't it?
It's a guide to awakening to that true self.
To living from a place of authenticity, presence, and love. And if you're finding these ideas as thought-provoking as I am, I encourage you to check out our podcast, Book Talks Wisdom, where we dive deep into all sorts of books just like this.
We break down complex concepts, share personal stories, and offer practical takeaways.
And if you subscribe, you'll get notifications for our latest episodes, so you won't miss a single discussion.
Plus, we love hearing from our listeners.
We do. If there's a book you'd love for us to explore, leave us a comment and let us know.
Your suggestions help us create an awesome library of book decodes that cater to your interests.
So whether you're seeking personal growth, spiritual insights, or just a fresh perspective on life, Book Talk's wisdom is the place to be.
Now, as we continue our journey through a new earth, I'm curious, what's standing out to you the most so far?
What concepts or insights are really resonating?
For me, it's that image of the ego as this separate entity. Like, there's this little voice in my head that's not always looking out for my best interests.
It's a sneaky little voice.
It is, and it makes me wonder, if we can become more aware of it, what kind of freedom and peace might become available to us?
Yeah, it's like Tolle's giving us this permission slip to question those thoughts, to ask ourselves, is this really true? Is this thought serving me? Or is it just the ego trying to keep me small?
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our power, realizing that we don't have to be victims of our own minds.
And one thing that really struck me in A New Earth was Tolle's perspective on relationships.
Oh yeah, how we can use them as a mirror.
Yes. He's saying our relationships can reflect back to us our own patterns, our unresolved issues, all that stuff we're carrying around.
It's like they become this incredible opportunity for growth.
Totally. Because often we're projecting our own unmet needs and expectations onto the other person.
And then we end up feeling disappointed or resentful when they don't live up to this idealized image we have in our heads.
Exactly. So instead of blaming the other person for our unhappiness, Tolle's encouraging us to turn the spotlight inward.
To ask ourselves, okay, what's my part in this? How am I contributing to this dynamic?
I remember there was this time when I was going through a rough patch with a close friend.
Tell me about it.
I was so frustrated. I felt like they weren't being supportive enough. Like they weren't showing up for me in the way I needed them to.
It's tough when you feel like that.
It was. And I was harboring all this resentment like a good friend should,
I've been there. It's easy to fall into that trap of expectations.
And then I started reading A New Earth, and it was like a light bulb went off.
What shifted for you?
I realized I was projecting my own need for validation and reassurance onto my friend.
I see.
Instead of communicating my needs directly, I was just expecting them to read my mind.
The classic ego move.
It was. But once I recognized that pattern, I was able to approach the situation differently.
With more understanding, I imagine.
Yeah. Instead of blaming my friend, I was able to have a really honest conversation with them about my needs and my expectations. And it honestly transformed our friendship.
It's amazing how that works, right? When we take responsibility for our own stuff, it can totally shift the dynamic of a relationship.
Absolutely. And it's a great reminder that we're all on our own journeys. Everyone's doing the best they can with the tools they have.
That's so important to remember. We're all works in progress.
We are. And this brings me to another powerful concept Tolle explores. Surrender.
Surrender. Such a loaded word.
I know, right? It's often misunderstood as giving up or admitting defeat.
But Tolle has a very different take on it.
Right. He describes surrender as this conscious choice to align ourselves with the flow of life, to release our resistance to what is, and trust that there's a greater intelligence guiding us.
It's about letting go of that illusion of control.
Embracing the mystery of the unknown.
I love that. It's like recognizing that we're not the authors of our own stories. We're characters in a much grander narrative.
Yes. And when we surrender to that flow, we open ourselves up to all these possibilities that we could never have imagined on our own.
It's like letting go of the oars and trusting the current to carry us.
Such a beautiful image. But I imagine this can be a really challenging concept for a lot of people, especially those of us who are used to being in control.
For sure. Surrender is not for the faint of heart.
Do you have any advice for cultivating that sense of surrender in our lives?
Well, you can start by noticing where you're holding on too tightly.
Like clinging to a certain outcome or resisting a change that's happening?
Exactly. Once you identify those areas of resistance, you can start to practice letting go. It might mean surrendering your expectations, accepting things you can't change, or simply trusting that everything is unfolding as it should.
Sometimes the best thing we can do is get out of our own way. Let go of the reins and let life lead. And one thing I really appreciate about A New Earth is that it's not just a book of abstract concepts. Tolle also gives us a lot of practical advice for creating a more fulfilling life.
Totally. He emphasizes aligning our actions with our values, cultivating gratitude, practicing forgiveness, contributing to something greater than ourselves.
These are all things we can actually do, tangible steps we can take to bring these concepts to life.
It's about realizing that we have the power to create a more beautiful and compassionate world. starting with ourselves.
And if you're feeling inspired to dive deeper into these ideas and explore the wisdom of other books like A New Earth, I highly recommend checking out our podcast, Book Talks Wisdom.
We decode the core messages of a wide range of impactful books, breaking down complex ideas, sharing personal stories, and offering practical takeaways that you can apply to your own life.
And the best part is, if you subscribe to Book Talks Wisdom, you'll get notifications for our latest episodes so you won't miss out on any of the juicy discussions.
Plus, we love hearing from our listeners, so if there's a book you'd love for us to deep dive into, just leave us a comment and let us know.
We're always looking for new and inspiring reads to share with our audience. So keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and those bookshelves stocked with inspiring reads.
It's been such a pleasure exploring A New Earth with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy reading and happy exploring.